I worked at a psych facility in northern Arizona in the late 90s that changed me from being very doubtful of anything paranormal into someone who knows there's something going on around us. I work night shift. I've always preferred it and have almost always had NOC shift. From almost day one working at that facility, I had coworkers telling me, "You know this place is haunted, right?" I thought, nonsense. But then I started hearing and seeing it also. The locked facility where I worked was in the back of the larger office area of the outpatient clinic. There was a locked door that separated us from that area. Motion detection security was set at night, and any access to the front offices would require deactivating the alarm. My point is, nobody should be up there. Nevertheless, you could sit by that door, put your ear up to it, and listen to things going on all night long. You could hear sounds of doors opening and closing, footsteps knocking, and, occasionally, faint voices. I would be convinced there was someone up, so on several occasions I would walk the perimeter of the building. I would look into the windows and I never saw anyone. All the lights would be off, nothing. However, the really creepy stuff would happen in the locked unit where I worked. About twice a month, we would hear the faint sound of what sounded like a baby crying, coming from the ceiling. I was in denial and told myself there must be a cat living up there. I remember one night, I was sitting up with a nurse doing paperwork. She sees me look up and smiles and says, "You hear it, don't you?" It gave me the chills. We had one patient room that the clients would walk out of in the middle of the night claiming, "Someone's in my room." It was always the same room, and not always the same patients. It was always described as a guy or a man standing next to their bed. One night, we had no patients on the unit, which was a rarity, and we were in the day area doing paperwork when the door to that room violently flew open. It wasn't a draft, and nobody was anywhere near the door. It had never happened before, and I never saw it happen again after that. Here are the two things that finally convinced me that something was really spooky with that place. We had a patio in the back of the unit where we could take the patients for smoke breaks. It had two doors for access, one from the kitchen and one from the nurse's station. It was another one of those rare nights with no clients. I sat out on the patio for hours talking with a coworker. It was summer, so we had the nurse's station door open. In the middle of the conversation, with me facing that open door, I saw this white cloud moving along the ceiling of the nursing station. It came out of the children's unit, through a doorway, and continued on through the nursing station and out of sight. The coworker looked at me and said, "What did you just see?" I hesitantly told him, and he conveyed that, apparently, other people had described seeing the same thing in the past. It wasn't smoke. It was like smoke, but not. I guess it was more what white ectoplasm is described as looking like. Another time, I was working the night shift as usual, but this time we were completely full. All beds taken with patients. On this night, I began to feel ill. I took my temperature and I was running a fever over 100, but we were busy and short-staffed, so I had to stay on for the entire shift. Close to the end of the shift, I used the restroom in the children's unit, which had the only open beds. It's a small 2-room unit with a small day area and a restroom in between the 2 bedrooms. So I go in, piss, and As I'm walking out and back into the day area, I see a man standing next to me. The guy was wearing a brown suit, like someone would wear in the 30s or 40s. It was there in my peripheral vision for a split second, and when I looked directly at him, he was gone. I didn't get spooked. I honestly didn't even give it much thought. I figured being tired and running a moderately high fever just caused me to see some stupid stuff out of the corner of my eyes. I called off of work for the next night and rested up. So, 2 days later, I returned to work. We did our usual, take care of the patient's needs until they were all off to bed, and then started on the nightly paperwork. While doing the paperwork, this nurse says, "Hey, remember the night when you were sick? I saw a ghost in the kids' unit." She had already described it to everyone the previous night while I was home sick. She starts to tell me, "That night before the shift change, I used the restroom in the kids' unit, and when I walked out..." I stopped her and said, "Wait, there was a guy standing there wearing a brown suit from like the 40s? She had described to everybody seeing the same thing I had seen. I told absolutely nobody what I saw because I didn't care. I thought I was just seeing things due to the fever. Our coworkers thought we were just messing with them and set the whole thing up." That building is gone now. It's been torn down and is now an In-N-Out burger. That old building was converted into a psych facility after being run as a nursing home since the 60s. I bring it up because a lot of people have died in that building. I pulled a few weeks of the night shift once as part of a maintenance crew for a mental hospital. That, in and of itself, is already creepy. The patients there weren't simply your run-of-the-mill adolescents with depression issues who attempted suicide for attention and got locked up for 3 days or so. Some of these people were absolutely psychotic. Normally, I did electrical work for various businesses and other places around town with the company I was working for. But once, we got hired for this place for a time, and my God, some of the weirdest stuff ever happened to me. At night, this place was locked down, like a prison pretty much, for good reason, obviously, but there were times where the power would go out and we'd have to get it back up and running again. And I can tell you, it's a bad feeling when you're having to trust the light of your flashlight in pitch darkness, in a building mainly full of people who can easily kill you. I remember one night in particular when the power went down. I was sitting in the maintenance shop. Yeah, we had an actual shop because this place was just that big. And out of nowhere, the lights just blank right out, and I'm left in pitch black darkness. I had been sitting by myself in there messing around and waiting for a call on the radio for something that needed fixing. Out of nowhere, my radio starts going off and belching out squelch noises and static, even though it was on the correct frequency. And I heard a loud crash from the other side of the shop. I'm holding my flashlight in a death grip at this point, about ready to kill the first one who wanted to come at me. This wasn't a place to screw around in. I shine my light in the direction of the crash, and a large tool chest, the kind you'd find in a mechanic's garage, the big reddish-orange chest, is knocked completely over, and tools are lying all over the floor. At this point, I start hearing a metallic dragging sound across the shop floor, and I just nope on out of there. I could barely even see where I was going, but I managed to get to the exit door and I flew out. Mind you, I haven't said a word at this point, and certainly nothing over my radio. I didn't even take it with me, I was in such a hurry to get out of there. I book it to the main building, just as another member of the crew managed to reset the breaker and bring the lights back on. Our supervisor and the other members of the team are waiting in a lobby area, and I run up to them, apologizing for being late. My boss tells me no biggie. He had just talked to me over the radio, like moments before I got there. That was impossible. I didn't bring it with me, and I started freaking out when it started to become clear that I wasn't the only person who was in the shop at that time. After noping and trying to keep calm while telling this to my boss at the time, they initiate a security lockdown and send the big goon squad guys over to the shop. The entire place was locked down tight. We couldn't even go back there until it was completely secure. Eventually, they came back and found nothing. No evidence anyone else was actually in there, and every patient was accounted for in their rooms. I didn't sleep very well after that. And it wasn't really the only weird thing to ever happen to me there. The tool chest was solid. It couldn't have just fallen over on its own without a very noticeable seismic activity, or with someone pushing it with a serious amount of force. When it hit the ground, it sounded like the Hulk had shoved it down a flight of stairs. And they found nothing. I'm honestly never going to forget that anytime soon. That's a feeling that doesn't easily leave you. On another night that I had to work there, a few docs had transferred offices from one side of the facility to the main building. These offices were pretty far out from it, and for the first couple hours, my shift consisted of nothing else but helping lift and move heavy metal and oak desks to our flatbed, and the rest of the crew handled setting them up in their respective offices. About 4 hours in, all that stuff had been moved, and I was the last person over there. I was packing up computers to move because these offices were no longer going to be used. They were built in the mid-70s and were moldy, gross, and old. If you know architectural stereotypes from the time, you should have a good idea of how these buildings looked on the inside, aesthetics-wise. The problem I had with them was that they were cramped and super claustrophobic. I couldn't imagine why someone would design a set of offices like this. Getting the desks out was a serious pain on its own, but feeling like you weren't in a sardine can was impossible. The entire place also felt ridiculously out of date from the rest of the facility, like it was just stuck in time. The emptiness didn't help that either. As I was packing up the last of the computers into a box and was about to carry it out to my truck and take it to the main building, I look over my right shoulder down a corridor, and as I wiped sweat off my brow, I realized I was staring right at a child, no older than 6, in a typical patient smock. This made me nearly crap myself for a few reasons. One, I had huge doubts that any children had ever been admitted to this place in the past, and 2, I had huge doubts there were children here. Another reason this made me almost spook my pants was that I looked away, and when I looked back, he was still there. He was about 6 years old, messy brown hair, greenish eyes. He started laughing at me in a way typical of a horror movie, and then took off down a corridor to his left. Like an idiot, I decided to follow him. I'm already freaking out that I just saw that, and this location was too far from the main building for any of the patients to have realistically gotten out without setting off any alarms or security lockdowns. I get to the corridor he took off down and, as you'd expect, I found nothing. I decided to check out the one behind me just in case, and as I got halfway down it, I came to a set of metal double doors. This hallway seemed more fitting for a preschool. As I got up to the doors, and mind you, the lights were on, it was well lit and bright in this entire place. The door slams shut, hard, catching my left hand right in it. I felt the flash of pain all the way up to my shoulder, and then nothing. My whole arm felt like it went instantly numb after that. I didn't know it at the time, but that had broken almost every knuckle in my left hand. The door flung open and smashed the wall so hard the push bar on it came right off and clanged against the floor. At the end of the corridor, I saw the kid again, standing at the very end of the hall, and he walks into a different office that we had cleared a few pieces of equipment out of earlier, and its door slammed. It slammed so hard the small pane of glass in the window shattered. Remember, this all happened in perfect lighting. No super spoopy grim darkness. I saw all this plain as day, and there was no mistaking at all what I had seen. I swear to Christ, this actually happened. This was the last event I'd experienced there, because after this, I abruptly quit the company and started working in a totally different field. I had taken the gig as a cheap summer job while I was in college. I got out of there as quickly as possible, told my boss he could get the rest of the equipment in there himself, and quit. I drove to an urgent care place nearby because I wasn't about to trust the doctors in a mental ward after I'd just gone on a ramble about a ghost kid who'd crushed my hand with a metal door. That would not have gone well, and I found out that I hairline fractured nearly every bone in my hand and cracked 2 of my knuckles. I did a bit of research on the place after that, whilst collecting a bit of workman's comp for my hand. I needed 2 surgeries on it to get it back into proper working order, and discovered that a handful of child murderers who had managed to convince a jury for an insanity plea had been locked up there. A few of them made BTK look like a choir boy. That really didn't settle well with me, because at the time, I was a religious person, and this event directly had an effect on my faith. I felt awful that God could trap a child's soul in a place that awful and force it to relive that horror for eternity, and that it just didn't care. If you can't tell from my posts, I've never really gotten over these incidents.